Imagine living in a house where something unseen crawls into bed with you at night, or hearing boots stomping through an empty apartment below. Picture a Ouija board session turn into a connection with a loved one, only to have the air grow heavier as if something darker joins the conversation. And what about the icy chill of realizing a darker force may have followed you home, lurking just out of sight? Tonight we delve into chilling stories of hauntings, mysterious forces, and encounters that blur the line between the living and the dead. Now these tales just aren't about things that go bump in the night. They're about things that refuse to let go. Welcome to Retraced Echoes. Now last week we covered some of these stories from the same book. It's True Ghost Stories and Hauntings Volume 1 by Barb Shadow. Now I found a lot of these stories extremely fascinating. In fact, I picked out just a few stories this week that I think will create a pretty cool podcast experience, but be sure to check out the book. As always, there's a link to it in the description down below. It's just a link. There's no affiliate link there, but I'm excited for you to hear just a few of the stories from the book. So let's dive into the shadows and uncover more of what lies in the dark.
Some nights carry a quiet that feels alive, as if the air itself is holding its breath. Tonight, we step into the shadows of a home where silence hides something far darker. This is the story of a woman, her family, and an unseen presence that refused to be ignored. Keep the lights on. This is the tale of Did You Feel That?
Imagine this. It's the dead of winter. The kind of cold that bites through your skin and makes the hair on the back of your neck stand on end. But what if the chill wasn't from the weather? What if it was something, let's just say something else? It was 1997, a quiet, restless night. A woman laying in bed, glancing at the clock that has just now turned 5:30 in the morning. Her husband was sleeping in another room to ensure a good night's rest before work. Exhausted, she rolls onto her side, hoping for just a few more moments of peace before the kids wake up. But then she felt it. Arms, unseen and heavy, wrapping around her. One arm slid between her and the mattress, the other draped over her shoulder. It was cold, silent, and impossibly close. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if it was possibly the comforting presence of her late grandmother. Then she heard it. Breath, cold and deliberate. It whispered against her ear. Now fear gripped her. She was unable to move, to call out. Her eyes snapped open, but the room was still. Shadows loomed, unchanged, and then, just as quickly as it came, the presence disappeared. The clock now read 5:35 in the morning. It had only been 5 minutes, but it felt like an absolute eternity. The years passed, but the house, it didn't feel right. Objects moved without explanation. Whispers filled empty rooms. And then in 2015, something darker arrived. Her husband, he brought home a knife from a gun and knife show. Beautiful piece with an ornate hilt. From the moment that it entered her house, she felt as though something was just off. When her husband would jokingly slide the blade against her arm, she felt an intense shiver of dread. Shadows in the house, they seemed to be deepened now. Figures lingered in the corners of her vision, an extra presence that didn't belong. Then one night, her husband woke up at 3:30 in the morning and texted her from another room. The message was chilling. The hallway to the children's room, it was consumed by a darkness unlike anything that he had seen in the past. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was a darkness that seemed alive, swallowing everything around it. The final night was the worst. See, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. She woke up to find her bedroom doorway was completely engulfed in like a darkness. What was once dimly illuminated by appliances and clocks was now an endless void. It felt as though something was there, just watching and waiting. She couldn't go back to sleep. As minutes ticked by and then hours, it was 4:30 in the morning and the light, it returned, but the fear had never subsided. Desperate for answers, she turned to a friend who was also a paranormal investigator. Together, they discovered that the knife had been hidden underneath her bed. Attached to it was a malevolent energy that was spreading throughout the entire home. Using sage and salt, they cleansed the knife and banished the oppressive force. Now, though the shadows lifted, the question lingered. Was it the knife that brought the darkness, or was it something else that was waiting for an invitation? Whatever it was, one truth remained. Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed.
Some mysteries don't come wrapped in answers. They linger, defying explanation, slipping through the cracks of reality. Tonight, we journey into the woods, where laughter and campfires gave way to something far more unsettling. Join us as we uncover the haunting tale of What Was That?
It was a warm August evening in 2015. It was the kind of night where the air hums with life and the stars burn bright. A family gathered in the woods just behind their home, enjoying the end of summer with a casual little camping trip. Now the tents, they were pitched in a small clearing, and they were centered around a fire pit. Now the flames, they danced as children played, and the adults' laughter, it mingled with the crackling of wood and the occasional chirp of crickets. Now the woods were alive, yet the stillness, it crept in as the sun dipped below the horizon. The chairs would form a ring around the fire, and the family settled into quiet conversation. Their voices were the only sound in the growing darkness. Then, without warning, something caught her eye. Hovering between the tents and the treetops, it was like the sphere of light, no larger than about a grapefruit, but impossibly bright against the dark canvas of the night. It moved slowly, some would say deliberately, gliding upward before vanishing into the shadows of the trees. The woman's heart quickened as she turned to her niece, who just sat just a few feet away. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling with unease. Wide-eyed, her niece nodded. "Twice," she replied, pointing first behind the woman and then towards the trees. The family, it fell silent, their joy dampened by the weight of the unknown. Now the orb had no source, there was no explanation. There was no flashlight beams, there was no stray car headlights. Just the firelight flickering in the clearing and an overwhelming sense of now being watched. In the years that followed, the oddities, they didn't stop. They seemed to shift from the woods to the woman's house, bringing a quiet chaos that defied reason. In July of 2006, she noticed that the smoke detector outside her bedroom was dangling. Her assumption was probably no different than what any of ours would be. Well, clearly her husband had been replacing the batteries, so she left it alone. She decided she would just deal with it later. I mean, it was high enough up she couldn't even reach it if she wanted to. Days passed and she forgot about it until the family returned home from the country fair. Her husband complimented her on fixing the detector, but she hadn't touched it. In fact, when she looked, he was right. The device, it was placed securely back where it had begun. And the children, they were aged 12, 9, and 7. There's no way that they could have done it. The house had been locked all day, and the husband swore he had never fixed it. It was as though someone or something wanted to ensure their safety. And then there was the ceramic mouse. It was a simple decoration that was painted by her grandmother, and it was resting on a shadow box in the living room. One morning, she found it turned backwards, its tiny little face staring into the darkness of the wall. The effort that it took to climb and move the figure was enough to rule out any of the children. Now let's fast forward the clock to September of 2012. Her oldest daughter, she was asking about a very sentimental gift from the crawl space, some childhood toy to give to a friend who was expecting a baby. Now the attic hatch, it was always kind of heavy, and it was kind of a pain to go up there every single time. When her husband finally relented and climbed up, he was met with a resistance. You see, the hatch, it wouldn't budge. Puzzled, he pushed even harder, and with a groan of effort, the hatch finally gave way, sending toys cascading down the ladder. As they inspected the space, they found tubs of toys that had been moved and partially opened. Some were even organized into little small piles. I mean, no animals could have done this. There was no sign to force entry, no logical explanation. Her husband, once a staunch skeptic, could no longer deny what was happening. Then in February of 2014, there was an even stranger incident. She returned home that evening. She would open the basement door, halfway expecting her dog Mocha to greet her, but instead, she found that the basement was empty and eerily quiet. Upstairs, she would question her husband about the dog's absence. "She's outside," he replied. He was halfway confused. "No," she insisted. "She was in the basement." But that was impossible. Mocha had been outside the entire time, a fact that her husband confirmed. The family was baffled. Who or what had led her to believe that the dog was waiting in the basement? Years passed and the disturbances, they became less frequent, but they never truly stopped. It was 2018. The woman would walk into her kitchen and find a serving spoon bent clean in half. Its edges were unnaturally sharp. The air felt thick, charged with an unseen energy. She stared at the twisted metal, knowing it was yet again another puzzle that she may never solve.
Not all hauntings come from places of great tragedy. Sometimes they follow you home, uninvited, attaching themselves to the innocent and the unknowing. Tonight, we explore the story of a young family whose lives were forever altered by a shadow from the past. This is Just Like Me.
When Danielle's family moved to Reno, Nevada, she was just 4 years old. It was supposed to be a new chapter for her family, a fresh start, but from the very moment they stepped through the front door of the new house, things were off. She and her older sister stumbled together, both falling as though some type of invisible force had tripped them. It was an omen, though nobody realized it at the time. The house seemed normal, even at first glance, but soon it became anything but. The nights were the worst. Danielle and her sister shared a single bedroom, and darkness, it brought with it an overwhelming sense of dread. The girls would lie awake, clutching their blankets, their fear growing sharper with every passing moment. Danielle's older sister, Jenny, was only 5. Yet the house seemed to single her out. Over and over, a disembodied voice called her name, soft and insistent. "Jennifer. Jennifer." It whispered from the shadows, its tone almost hypnotic. Jenny never remembered hearing it the next day, but Danielle did. The sound of that voice would haunt her dreams, and more than once, she would wake to the cold, suffocating feeling of being watched. Their mother wasn't immune to the strange happenings either. She had her own unsettling encounters in the house by an unseen occupant, a little girl, probably no older than Danielle, who would appear and disappear at will. The girl's long blonde hair and nightgown gave her almost an angelic appearance, but something about her presence was deeply wrong. One evening, Danielle's mother thought that she saw her daughter running right down the hallway, the child's golden hair streaming behind her. "Danielle, Nicole, stop running," she shouted. But when she turned the corner, she found Danielle sound asleep on the couch. Then came the footsteps, Late one night, as the girls played in their rooms, they heard it. Rapid, heavy footsteps thundering up and down the hallway outside. Their bedroom door was wide open, and there was no mistaking this kind of sound. It was as though someone or something was pacing back and forth, waiting for them to come closer. Terrified, they ran to their parents, screaming about the noise, but when their parents returned with them, the hallway was empty. Only silence remained. They were told it was just their imagination, yet the pattern, it would repeat again and again and again. As days turned into weeks, the activity, it escalated. Lights flickered on and off, and doors opened and closed on their own. One night, Danielle's sister, Jenny, screamed and pointed to the darkness at the end of the hallway. There in the dim light was a shape. A shadowy figure that seemed to glide closer with every flicker of the bulb. Their parents could no longer ignore the truth. You see, something was up with the house, something they couldn't see, but they certainly couldn't deny. And whatever it was, wasn't alone. Danielle's mother oftentimes saw three figures together, a man and two children, their outlines barely visible, yet undeniably human. When confronted, the figures would just fade, their presence lingering only into an icy chill that they left behind. Even after they moved away, Danielle's encounters, they didn't end. In every house she lived in since, she's felt the presence of the same little girl, a mirror image of herself, yet with darker hair and an unsettling grin. Sometimes the girl appeared older, sometimes younger, but always the same sinister presence. Now, Danielle's little sister, she swears that she's seen the little girl too, and every time she feels the same dread. Danielle, she still dreams about her, though she wishes that she didn't. The girl who looked like her, but isn't her, is a reminder that some hauntings, they don't stay in the house. They follow you, shadowing your every step.
Have you ever wondered what secrets a Ouija board might reveal? For some, it's a tool of curiosity. For others, a bridge to the beyond. Tonight, we explore one peculiar session where laughter and mystery walked hand in hand. This is the story of a question many of us have joked about, but few have dared to actually ask.
The atmosphere was charged with excitement and perhaps a hint of unease as the group gathered around the large Ouija board. The house, it seemed to hum with an energy. There was fingers that was very delicately placed on the planchette, ready for whatever spirits might respond. But at first, as expected, the planchette didn't budge. Minutes ticked by, tension building. Then, almost by surprise, the planchette began to glide, going from letter to letter, forming words. A spirit had arrived. Within the group was a man who oftentimes spoke of spirits with somewhat of a lighthearted touch. This session, however, it took a very surprising turn. Feeling the playful energy in the room, decided to ask the unthinkable, a question that's oftentimes whispered amongst many who don't believe, but it's never spoken aloud with a seriousness. He leaned forward with a very mischievous grin and asked, "Can you give me the lottery numbers?" Sounds like a question that Paul Kenyon would probably ask of a Ouija board. Now, for a moment, the room had held its breath. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the planchette slid smoothly to 0. Gasps filled the air, followed by nervous chuckles. One of the participants, notebook in hand, scrambled to jot down the numbers as they appeared. 5, the spirit indicated before moving back. to 0. Was that 50? Someone whispered, trying to interpret the cryptic response. But the planchette had moved again, spelling out 6 digits. 6, 7, 0. By now, the group, they were both bewildered and amused. The numbers seemed random, yet they carried an undeniable sense of purpose. The man chuckled, shaking his head as the planchette pointed to 8 and then finally 9, only to return to 0 once more. "Are you having a laugh with us?" he asked out loud with a grin. The spirit seemed to respond with a playful flick, as though confirming the humor of the moment. Everyone in the room, they began to laugh. I mean, how could you not laugh at the sheer absurdity of asking some spirit or otherworldly being for financial advice? But beneath the laughter, there was a lingering of perhaps wonder. What if, just what if, these numbers, they held meaning beyond the surface? As the session grew to a close, the man thanked the spirit for its company. "You've got a great sense of humor," he said, his voice filled with warmth. See, for him, this moment, it wasn't just about seeking answers. It was a connection, a playful encounter with the unknown. Can Ouija boards be dangerous? Perhaps, but like any toy, their power lies in the intention of those who use them. Sometimes they lead to answers, other times they lead us to more questions, and occasionally they remind us that even in the unknown, there's always a little bit of room for a little laugh.
Sometimes the unknown doesn't just haunt the shadows. It weaves itself into the choices we make, pulling us deeper into its grasp. Tonight, we follow a chilling tale where curiosity leads to consequences far beyond what anyone could imagine. This is a darker turn.
The story begins in Essex, England, within the cold, silent walls of a Coalhouse fort. The location, it was steeped in history and whispers of the paranormal. A perfect setting for an investigation by a group of ghost hunters. Amongst them was Sue, a member of the Essex Ghost Investigation Team. And what started as a standard session with a Ouija board would take a turn that none of them had anticipated. The board sat in the center of the room, illuminated by that of flickering candles. Simple glass served as a planchette. The group placed their fingertips just lightly on the edge. At first, the session was uneventful. The glass didn't even move. The air remained still. But when Sue asked if there was any spirits that was present, the glass began to tremble, and then it began sliding across the board. The spirit identified itself as someone who was close to Sue, her Nan. The room felt heavier as the glass spelled out a message. See, Sue's Nan was disoriented, confused, as though she didn't know where she was. Through the board, Sue asked, "Are you showing me how you passed?" The glass moved very decisively to yes. For Sue, this was more than just an answer. It was a revelation. She realized that her Nan had never been able to convey the pain of her passing to those she left behind, and now, here in the cold walls of the Coalhouse fort, she had a chance. But as soon as the message was delivered, her Nan's presence faded, leaving behind a silence that felt oddly hollow. It was then that the session took a much darker turn. The glass began to move again, more erratic this time. Another spirit had joined. Now inside this group of those that was messing with the Ouija board was Sue's nephew, Danny. He felt the air change, a sudden drop in temperature that made his skin crawl. The group would ask, "Who are you?" Spirit? It didn't answer directly. Instead, it began revealing connections, names that only Sue and Danny could even recognize. Spirit was tied to Sue's family, but remained very distant from Danny. When asked if it had been present at Danny's near-death experience during surgery, the glass again moved to yes. It was almost as though the unseen entity had been watching, ensuring that Danny survived his ordeal. As the group pressed for clarity, the glass spelled out the initials WGC. A chill ran right down Sue's spine. See, these were the initials of her granddad, Cook. Now, during his life, he'd always been a jokester, full of humor and mischief. Now, even in death, he made his presence known in a most unexpected way. Now, the Ouija board session had concluded, but the question still remained. The spirit of Sue's granddad had come to protect, to connect, but also to warn. The dark energy that they felt, I believe, and those that read the book believe, that maybe it was not her granddad to begin with. It was something else, something darker, something deeper. But then he pushed through, almost to protect the group. What might have happened if his presence had not intervened? You see, in the pursuit of answers, we often forget the cost of the questions that we ask. Some spirits, they seek closure, others seek connections, but sometimes their reasons for staying go far beyond what we can ever understand. And in places like Coalhouse Fort, where the past lingers, the line between protection and possession become dangerously thin. Perhaps it's better to not ask at all.
Some homes are meant to be sanctuaries, but what happens when the walls themselves seem to hold malevolence? Tonight, we follow the story of a family whose faith and resolve were their only defenses. This is Ever Vigilant.
The house was modest, split into two separate apartments, one that was upstairs and one that was downstairs. And at the time, only the upstairs apartment was occupied by Belinda, her husband, their 10-month-old son, and her sister. The downstairs apartment sat empty, but that did very little to ease the family's growing unease. It began with footsteps, loud, deliberate, stomping sounds that echoed as if boots were marching through the empty spaces. Then came the banging on the walls, so loud it carried beyond their home and was heard by the neighbors across the street. At night, the presence became undeniable. Something unseen crawling into bed with them, disturbing their sleep and leaving them rattled. The oppressive feeling of being watched hung over them like dark clouds, a sensation that never seemed to leave. The fear escalated one evening when Belinda's sister was preparing to take a shower. Feeling the deep sense of uncomfort, she left the bathroom door open as a precaution. While she stood there washing her hair, the shower curtains ripped violently from the ring, sending her into a terrified crouch in the tub. Now, Belinda and her husband, they would run to the bathroom to find her sobbing, overwhelmed by the unexplainable force that had just disturbed her. Desperate for relief, her family turned to their Reverend, who advised them to carry out a cleansing ritual using holy water. He would instruct them to open one window and then systematically going from room to anoint each window and doorway with a cross while reciting the Lord's Prayer. When they would make their way back to the room with the window, they would close the window down and seal it as the very last thing, closing the space and banishing whatever was there forever. As the ritual began and they started reciting the prayer, the tension in the air, it seemed to grow very heavy. As they worked their way through the house, marking every single surface with holy water. The activity? Some would say it exploded. Objects flew off dressers and bed-sized tables, and the baby's bassinet was knocked over. The walls, they vibrated with violent pounding. Through it all, they continued praying, their voices unwavering. Finally, they reached the open window with one final act of faith. Belinda's husband closed the window, marking it with crosses. He placed one final cross in the center, and then the house went silent. The darkness that had plagued the entire house, it had lifted, leaving behind the unfamiliar sense of calm. Now, though the Reverend assured them that the cleansing had worked, they remained vigilant. See, their son, during the ritual, he's dressed in red, marked with holy water, was taken to a very safe location as the Reverend had instructed. Despite the peace that followed, the family's sense of security never fully returned. In fact, Belinda's sister, she continued to suffer nightmares, and no one dared be left alone in the house. Even with the oppressive force seemingly gone, they were haunted by whatever had endured. After 8 months, the family moved out, leaving their memories and, well, the house behind. But the experiences, it stayed with them. A reminder of the unseen force that can invade even the safest of places. Well, I'm hoping you enjoyed these stories. I hate to ask for this, but if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, if you've not subscribed to the channel, definitely hit the subscribe button. I'm kind of curious if you guys would be interested in me doing like a behind the scenes after these stories and kind of tell you what my thought process was. Did I think that there were certain things to it that caught my attention, or maybe we can have a deeper conversation about some of the little things inside the story, like the Ouija board session. And I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below of these stories. Do you think there's any that caught your attention or anything that's super spooky within them? But until I see you on the next podcast, goodbye.